brightly.
Agenda, as I said, we're just going to introduce our speakers here soon. Then DK and John Dufay are going to run through the Education Operations Health Index results and an overview of our budget and staffing results. And then we will wrap up and have a Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our first presenter, Mr. David Carnegie. You might know him as DK or the mayor. Since 1998, David has worked predominantly in the operations management industry. His current role is the community director, where he manages the School Dude and soon Dude Solutions community website and social media platforms with topics involving industry insight and knowledge sharing. It's David's mission to understand and support the Dudes industries by accelerating their professional development, addressing their professional pains, and to provide fun and inspiring information and content. And next, we have Mr. John Dufay representing us from Albuquerque Public School System. John is the Executive Director of Operations at Albuquerque Public Schools and has 30-plus years of experience in the operations industry. Albuquerque Public Schools is the largest school district in New Mexico with over 140 schools and roughly 95,000 students. John's a data guru and has used this data at his school system to help enact a preventive maintenance program that has saved over $2 million in the past 5 years. Without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Mr. DK, and he will take it on from here.
Thank you, Zach. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today in our webinar. This is a topic that I get very passionate about, is how to use data to tell a story and some things that you may want to look at gauging health. And also going to have John jump in on a few things talking about the health of data in a second. Where does some of the data come from? It actually came from our clients. We look at what our operations institutions have been doing across the board. So you're talking well over 6,000 educational institutions, a large chunk of the nation. We were talking about things like 15 plus 16 million work orders. Probably going to be looking at about between 16 and 17 million work orders for this year. Looking at IT work and some of the incidents that are out there. So these are some of the things we were looking at in our surveys and also looking at data. One of the things that people like is a nice roll-up of information, things like KPIs, statistics, something that gives you a nice, simple look at what's happening and then diving down into details. And that's some of the things we'll be looking at today is we're looking at some high-level numbers, but then delving down into the stories behind those numbers. And that's something that you want to do at a local level as well. At first, we mined our database, and using tools like business intelligence tools like Dude Intelligence, we mined the database to look for patterns and then help people do the same thing at the local level. Things such as work orders, preventive maintenance routines, IT assets, maintenance assets, capital planning, deferred maintenance. We take a lot of that information up and we score it to see what is essentially our finger on the pulse of what's happening in these various areas. But in addition to a lot of the data that is very objective, you also have to get subjective, which is what are the situations that you're dealing with some of these numbers, which is why we're doing polling questions today. Certainly we've done the survey. We had over 200 people respond, but we also wanted people that were in the survey today or in the webinar today to have surveys that we can actually take live and show you the results from people that are on the call with you. So these areas that we were diving deep down into, like preventive maintenance and technology and so on, you're going to see us cover those areas today. And we also had our data analysts come into this, and we have people that actually have degrees in this. They're actually pretty smart with it, to look at what are some of the things we have to consider with some of these areas. And you almost need that at a local level. And I really want John to talk about, we're talking about data at a national level, technically an international level today. John, do you want to talk about what you're doing with data at the local level?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I think one of the things that's happening is it's truly with data we're developing this respect for mining of this cutting-edge data that's impacting a true culture shift in the industry, in operations, in maintenance, way things are done anymore. It's no longer waking up and doing maintenance by the seat of your pants or being reactive. Something shuts down, something's not working, you're reactive. the data is there, and the whole culture shift is to doing more preventative maintenance, extending the life cycle of equipment, and then the big thing is utilizing that data for a decision-making process where you get the data, you analyze it, you then can advocate for funds, or you can advocate what it is you're doing, your priority of your project, and then you can decide what you do and you move forward. But they're data-driven decision-making process that really has never been in the industry until just recently. And with this type of data that we're receiving, and that's out there in SchoolDude that you're producing every single day with your work order systems and stuff, the schools are able to look at that and actually make good decisions that are the decisions that need to be done based on true facts and not just what your gut feeling is.
Yeah, gut feelings are good as long as you've got the data to back it up. And that's a good segue into getting into some of these indices and how we had things like with these composite scores, things like a KPI or key performance indicator to get us started with this. So what we call the OHI. So this is a magic number right now. It's almost like a temperature gauge. What is occurring? This is a composite score. It's an overall indicator of the health of the operation, specifically for the educational sector. We're going to dive down into 6 of these supporting indices that cover these major areas of operations like IT, maintenance, and events, and so on. The way this was scored was based on a combination of our database and how people were using it, how they're conducting their daily responsibilities, but we also wanted the subjective data, so we had a 23-question survey to get the sentiments of operations leaders. So a lot of these cases, a score or a number, we have an internal phrase, it's not a bad number, it's a number. It's intended to drive awareness and to drive a conversation. So some things are not always optimistic, they're not always negative. Some cases it may say we need work or we're doing well, but I always tell people when you're looking at things like statistics and numbers is you have to take emotion out of it and really start looking at what can we do from a conversational standpoint and an understanding standpoint to see what kind of work we have ahead of us to improve operations. So the topical breakdowns, we're going to go into these areas, preventive maintenance versus deferred maintenance. We're going to look at the usage of our facilities by groups internal but primarily external to our organization who's coming in to use our campuses. We're also going to look at IT, utilities, and the safety process as well. First poll, what percent of work, because we're going to start with preventive maintenance, what percent of work do you think should be dedicated to preventive efforts? So just want to get a quick finger on the pulse. What do you think should be dedicated to preventive maintenance efforts? So again, we're going to give about a good 30 seconds or so for people to take that. And then what we're actually going to do is show you some numbers behind the scenes into what is occurring with that. And we're also going to have John talk about some of the things that they've done with preventive maintenance and some of the things that they've seen as a result. But we wanted to get a good, quick finger on the pulse. Is what do you think should be dedicated to preventive? So we're going to give about another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get your fingers in fast. Skip to the results. 25 to 50 is the magic number. All right, that will work. So that's a good polling effort right there. Good insight. Now, what do you think affects how preventive maintenance gets done? We'll hear people say a lot of times that, well, we don't have the resources, and resources could be staff, it could be budget. What do you think is the primary thing that you're working with? Some people are saying we've got a lot of our experienced people that are retiring. It's hard to find new people that are coming in. There might be a learning curve behind that. And sometimes it might be outside forces. But that's the big 4 that we'll typically get, and sometimes buy-in from our executive staff, our board, and so on. So I just want to see what are some of the primary things that you're seeing, and I'm already seeing some of the results is pretty well in line with what I was thinking. So we're going to give another 7 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this was a good balance of what I've heard from people say over the years. Getting buy-in is often the toughest thing. Certainly, I know when people talk about with their cars, they'll go more likely to take their car to a dealership. But when it comes to property, it's not always so cut and dry. And sometimes it may be not understanding the full cost. I'll let John elaborate on some things he's run into. But these are some things I know I've certainly heard are things like quantity of staff to accomplish the job, and then some of the buy-in. John, you want to talk about some of the ways that you were able to overcome some of these areas that we've got here in the poll?
Well, sure. I think, focusing on preventive maintenance is definitely an investment in the school district. That's the first thing they have to realize, that it is an investment, and it's a very positive investment. The numbers are indisputable. You see where if you have a good maintenance program, a good PM maintenance program, your work orders are fewer, but the main thing is they're less expensive. You may have they may not drop off in numbers as much, but the cost is definitely dropping off because you don't have catastrophic failures. You end up having some things fail, but they're simple fixes. The other thing that we found out really in the poll question you talk about, and you mentioned something about buy-in, we found out that the buy-in was hardest, and that's what I would have answered was buy-in, but not from management as much as from mid-management, the guys that are running the crew. The upper management didn't have a problem with it. It was more the supervisors and some of the managers who are running crews and some of the technicians thinking they had to have more money to do it. They thought, well, you got to bring in a new department because that's what their mindset is. It's you have an HVAC, well, we need a preventive maintenance HVAC crew, and then we need other crews. Instead of just dividing the crews up and start saying, you're going to do the reactive work and you're going to do the proactive work and do the maintenance work. And that's what we started out doing. It was very difficult to get buy-in until they started seeing some results, and they're participating in how that buy-in occurred. So that was really, really difficult. And then, of course, one of the things we had to do was celebrate the successes we had to where they started seeing the buy-in was worth it. And encouraging the employees that the PM work is the way to go, and which minimizes also deferred maintenance, the horrible black hole of deferred maintenance down the line.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny you say, one of the things I actually saw this morning on Twitter, since I do some of our social media here and monitor things, is we actually saw a crew out in California were saying that they had 11% more 11% more HVAC work in August. No, they had 5% more HVAC work, but they closed out 11% more work. So they had the same crew, more work, but got more done. And a lot of it was just shifting priorities of what was out there. And like you say, once you can get that momentum going, that these changes are positive. Like I say, it may not be at the board level or the executive level or what we call the C level, but certainly getting the local buy-in with the crews is definitely big, that if they're doing more preventive work, that's less emergencies they have to deal with. And I don't think with facility directors we have to explain that a penny saved is a penny earned, a lot of the Franklin quotes, they understand that. It's really seeing where the effects can come in. But luckily we have seen that, yes, there is kind of a neutral outlook from what the survey came back with about what's happening with preventive maintenance. People don't feel like they're doing as much as they want to do, which a lot of people were saying it's maybe 30%, but luckily it has gone up that 20% of their work in this past year was dedicated to preventive maintenance. So we are seeing a slight tick upward. That's great. But there's still a little work that has to be done in that. And this has always been one of the toughest battles to fight, is this will save us time and money down the road. We have to invest the mindset as well as the time and the budget into this so that we can start seeing these results. So it's a slow climb, but there are positive results that come out down the road. So that was one of the first things. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think that's one of the things that needs to happen is because it is a slower uphill climb, you need to show those successes so people start to buy into it. And if you're keeping track and doing daily reports in your school dude work order system on preventive maintenance work orders as well as reactive work orders using the PM module, one of the things that happens is that we saw in August, from August 1st to September 1st, we saw a huge climb in work orders for HVAC, obviously, which we do, but we had received about 2,800 work orders in that 30-day period, 20 days of work period, and the guys completed the majority of all of them, and they were really surprised because they had no idea that they had completed that much, because the PM work was go in, you do the PM work, you change filters, you do the things, you adjust things, and you go on to the next thing. They weren't making big major repairs. They were just doing the preventative side to extend that life, but to extend the work, how those things operated. And I think that was one of the things that surprised them, was they had no idea they actually completed that much work.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, having statistics and numbers and maybe even a pretty graph like here is what shows where those impacts are. And then looking at things like work order histories, a lot of people, they get hung up that a PM has to be on a roof and a boiler and a rooftop unit and things like that. What one of the guys did is he said, let me go look to see where is some of our biggest areas of reactive work, and it was actually on door hardware. So he set up routines that said, go look at door hardware, make sure that the closers aren't broken, that the closing mechanisms, the bars are all fine, and they saw a decrease in that amount of work, so they were able to reallocate that time in another area. And those things start adding up to our next section, which is deferred maintenance. And we wanted to see, where do people place when it comes to a time frame? When they're looking at things like deferred maintenance, what quarter of the year are you typically looking at building up and analyzing your backlog, looking at things that you have on maybe renewal cycles, like that roof should last every 20 years, when is it coming up? Our carpet should last every 7 or 8 years, when are those coming up, along with what carpets are having torn and frayed seams. When do you start putting together the honey-do list for the future and getting your budget set aside? So I want to give people a chance to take that poll. We're going to give you about another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so most people, wow, it's a pretty good mix of the spring and the summer. December used to be a pretty popular one that people would start thinking about it, and then they might start getting ready in the first quarter to get that list, but it starts getting finalized in quarter 2, so that way they can launch into quarter 3. So this is pretty well a shift from what we've seen in the past. It's actually moved up a quarter or moved back a quarter than what we've typically seen out there. But we have seen some people, as this poll indicates, that they're doing it on a quarterly basis. Some of the colleges we work with, they actually try to sit down maybe every 2 to 3 months, go through the list, update, shift, prioritize, take some things out, add some things in. So I have seen in a lot of the higher ed institutions where they work on a quarterly basis to keep up with what's out there. Now, one of the things that we will often get the question on, and many of you may remember, there used to be American schools and universities used to put out a report every year where they would show the age of the buildings. This is actually a decrease from what we had seen in those publications. I think the last one I saw was maybe back in 2008, 2009, where a lot of the buildings were in the mid-40s. So luckily we've seen some new construction over the years, and looking at things like, well, the typical school, public K-12, is just under 40 years old, higher ed it's just over 40. But we also have to consider, when you're looking at things like deferred maintenance, it depends on the building. So certainly there's been a lot of new dorms built in colleges. At a school, there's been a lot of wings added too. So when you look at a campus, that's where it starts getting down into the minutia. But on an overall level, we're still looking at about 40 years, give or take, too. So what is the outlook on deferred maintenance? Now, this is a number I've seen even before 2013. Was just over, not quite, halfway between $5,000 and $6,000 per student. And we use that because that's how some people get their funding. They get funded on a per student basis versus maybe a per square foot basis. So looking at that number, here's the new number, just over $6,600 per student. So we're talking almost a 20% increase of what's happened over time. And also we had just over half the folks say that about 3% of their budgets were set aside for deferred maintenance and replacement projects. One of the most common questions I've heard people ask over the years is, how much should I set aside for deferred maintenance? You'll hear some people say out there, maybe Harvey Kaiser is a great resource out there. He might say, well, you might need to set aside about 2.5% of the building's value for capital, and then maybe another 2.5% of the building's value, current replacement value, for normal operations. That's a good round number to start with, but you may have to think about the age of the building. Is that, yes, when we open up a building on day one, it's running great. But in year 5, some things are going to need to start being replaced, some minor things. Year 10, there's going to be some bulges. Year 20, we're talking about some major items might be coming up, like roofing and HVAC. John, any thoughts on capital, deferred maintenance, anything that you've seen as far as best practices or ideas or insight on that?
One of the things that we've been doing across with different school districts and with our school district is obviously having a capital master plan, but having a line item in the capital master plan for deferred maintenance, along with just your typical projects that you're doing. One of the things that happens across this country, on matter of fact, that the school dude and the Council of Great City Schools did a report a few years ago on the deterioration of school buildings across the country and how many school districts recognize the deferred maintenance issue and they address it. The problem is the school districts don't address it with money. They address it by identifying it a lot of times, and then they just put it in, on the shelf and hope that they get funding for it somehow, which doesn't really happen unless you start advocating for it. And one of the things that we do is we put that in our line item, and so we address deferred maintenance on a yearly basis on the capital master plan, and we fund it through the master plan on a 5-year or a 6-year cycle. Every year we get a sixth of what we decided to spend on deferred maintenance, being projects out there. Deferred maintenance can also be taken up by a remodel or a brand new building or anything else like that. But we try to give it a line item to where those dollars aren't deferred to other places. They really go to the maintenance of deferred maintenance, to where you start addressing those projects that you can't address today because you don't have it in your budget. It's a bigger project, or it may take phases to do. So those have to be done every single year when you're doing that. And of course, then that's the whole issue with deferred maintenance, is adequately funding those projects and making sure that actually gets done, because what will happen is, without that deferred maintenance being done, you are now going to be looking at a larger backlog, and you're going to have, again, you're in that vicious catch-22. If you don't do one, then your reactive becomes more, and you have more catastrophic failures, and then your PM program can't catch up because you're not doing the deferred maintenance, which everybody has to do. That's the whole problem. But that's the hardest thing for decision makers, having to do, make those decisions when they're looking at, do we fix the building or do we hire another librarian or another teacher, because it's about education. And so those are hard choices for board members and elected officials. But it makes it easier if you can bring them data. Again, it's mining the data, keeping track of everything, bringing it back to them in a comprehensive, story that you're telling. But it's true. It's not a story of make believe. It's a factual story, as it started out this conference of talking about. It's all your data tells a story about your district, exactly what's happening in your district.
Yeah, and like this stat up here is basically saying that 57% of people have less than 3% of their budgets set aside for this. The number we don't have on the screen is 26% were unsure of how much was set aside. And a lot of that may be playing into how the number games work and how other people are perceiving it and how much control they actually have over that process. So I don't know of a good way to segue into our next topic, so we're just going to shift gears completely. It is dealing with facilities, and something that does affect the backlog is actually community use. Most people may think it's just somebody comes in and uses the building, but you may know it as where they're coming in and using our facilities and they're consuming energy and there could be wear and tear. This is a two-sided question. The first one is from the point of view of the community groups. Do they think that they have a right to use your facilities? And I'll put this up as, well, we pay taxes or we pay tuition. We should get to use the buildings. That's the typical one that I'll typically hear out there. So from your perception of what the community thinks, do they think they have a right to use your facilities? So we're going to give that another few questions or a few sessions. While that's pulling up, just want you to know that the next question is, do you think that they have a right? But want to get the community's opinion or community's view if they think they have a right to use your facilities. So we're going to give that another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is pretty well in line with it. Most to absolutely all of the organizations, they think that because you're a part of the community and they're a part of the community and they've got investments in you, that they have the right to use the facility. Now, we're going to spin it to your point of view is, do you think that they're entitled to use your facilities? So we want to have kind of a middle ground. It depends on the organization or it depends on what they're hosting. Is that something that you think that they have the right to do that? So, oh, yeah, we're getting some passionate ones on this one. This poll's lighting up pretty fast. So, yeah, this one is right in the wheelhouse. Yeah, and I'll give a quote while we're giving people a chance to take this poll. A quote I heard a few years ago was, we like our nonprofits to come in as long as our nonprofits are very nice. One of the guys said, well, I'm a nonprofit. I shouldn't have to pay to use your facilities. The director said, yes, but I'm a not for loss because as soon as you walk in my buildings and start using items, I'm starting to lose money. So we do want to be a part of it, but we also have to recognize that our funding is dedicated towards education and our students, not being a community rec center. So there has to be a happy ground in the middle. So we're going to give about another 4 seconds for the poll. 4, 3, 2, 1. This is pretty much what I thought is it depends on the organization. There's a few more absolutely nots than I expected, but that's definitely not a shocker that there were some out there. A lot of times it does depend on the organization. Some independent schools say, no, we don't want to have our groups come in, maybe an alumni group or something, but we really don't want just anybody to come in and use our facilities. We've got certain stringent rules that are in place. Something that we've talked about over time, how did deferred maintenance come up? There you go. Outlook on community use of facilities. So here's a fun little fact about outlook on community use. It has been positive, and I like to think that we've had an influence on this. Most people are recovering more costs over time because what they're doing is they've been realizing, we've been talking about it for the last 10 years, that you could have costs, and again, I'll go back to the per student basis. You could be spending $60 per student for a group to come in and use your facilities when you think about custodian time, security time, energy, utilities, toilet paper, wear and tear on the buildings, administrative time, follow-up. Those things add up over time. We have to light the lights on the field. We have to fire up a boiler. We've got to get a zone pulled up. But a lot of people are saying they are doing a lot of rentals to the outside groups, but they're getting better at covering themselves on policies and costs and doing a better job with getting their fees in. So about 40% of the schools that use us, the schools and colleges, they are recovering the cost. They do say we're not out to make a profit, but we are out to recover costs, which is why we phrase it the way that we have. Luckily, they have not seen a high deterioration of their facilities from wear and tear. You're going to have exceptions here and there, A group doesn't know how to open the bleachers properly. They don't realize it's an automated system. That could be a high cost. But a lot of times wear and tear is pretty minimal to none. But it all depends on the group, and no donkey ball allowed in our facilities or no fairs on our grounds. Those are stories I've heard over time. Those are the extremes. Most groups are pretty good about coming in and using them. John, anything that you've seen as far as event usage that people may want to keep in mind, with things like policies and working with groups and protecting your facilities and protecting your budget on that?
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen is trying to identify. It's really a gray area. In the past, you would think, okay, a nonprofit group, the PTA and this and that, a group that was, Girl Scouts and that type of stuff. But what's happened now is with the way how the tax structures are done a little bit, it's very easy for people to get a 501(c) or whichever nonprofit group they get. And so when they become a nonprofit, they think they can utilize the facility. And obviously their customers are kids. And so we see a big thing where people try to utilize our facilities to bypass their just having a cost of business, where they have their own business. Instead, we've seen a lot of businesses just work out of their house, and they say, well, they're paying themselves. And so that's where we've gotten deeper and deeper into having to look at the community use, what it is that people are doing. We have a couple of staff members that do only facility use because scheduling and doing that, because we have so much use throughout the district where we have thousands of uses, thousands and thousands of uses a month. So when they schedule these things, we have to follow up because they're either charging, if they're charging for it, or even if they say, well, I do tutoring, but that may be their business, and so they're got an active audience. So there's some, there's a few little things out there that you got to watch out, some booby traps, but you really find out that by utilizing the system and the facility use, community use for facilities, you control it. You have a master calendar. You know who's in your facilities, who's not, and it's also great for security because when they call in, when someone's calling in on an evening or a weekend and the alarms are set, when they call in, our dispatcher or our police department looks up the facility use school dude, and they tell them they're there for a meeting. If they're not on the calendar, they're not allowed to go in. They refuse them entry and say, sorry, you can't, because they didn't go through the facility process. So it's really helped us to, from a security point of view even, of keeping people out of the buildings that aren't supposed to be there because they're not scheduled, even though they could tell somebody they are, but in reality we see they're not on the schedule. So it's been a very positive thing, and it really does help the community. The community loves it. They get to use it, but they understand. We're telling them the story about the opportunities that we have of having to pay electricity and paying for security and locking up and custodial. They see that, and so they're recognizing it more and more. It's a big learning curve for the community, and it's a learning curve for us. And I think working with the people at facilities, at Dude, they're helping to where you don't have to reinvent the wheel twice. But it really is a fabulous way to get community use, because the community needs to use the facilities, because schools across the country are becoming more so-called community schools.
Right. Yeah, and you definitely see that more in the rural areas where you may not have as many options. And certainly, like, we diving down in some numbers behind the scenes, in the last 12 months, there were about 8.5 million, just under 8.5 million events that occurred. And out of those events, almost 5.5 million tasks had to be performed between custodial, food services, IT, security, in order for those events to go on. And also the expenses, because just over half the respondents, about 55%, said that their stakeholders also view the facility use as a taxpayer right. And that actually can hurt you, that they don't want to increase the rental fees if the community is using the schools, but at the same time, they might be using charge rates or they're not charging at all. But a lot of times people are not reviewing their fee structures about what is actually involved in it, and that things like inflation have occurred over time or changes in utilities have occurred over time. And sometimes it's a political issue. And what I've seen some people do is they actually keep a little tally off to the side. Some people create a fake budget in one of our systems, or they keep a spreadsheet out there that says, you know, we actually donated $110,000 back to the facilities out of our budget that we have not recouped. And when you start taking the emotion out and just start putting in the numbers behind it, that's where we've seen people have successes in developing and updating cost recovery programs and fee structures, is by just simply using the numbers behind the scenes to say, look what we did. We did all these jobs. We had all these events. We donated this money back to the community. One board member or C-level executive may say, wow, that's great. You know, we can do some great PR around that. The next one may say, we lost how much money, you know, by letting these groups in? But again, take the emotion out of it, look at the numbers, and then start framing the story and the behind the scenes around those numbers. All right, our next topic. Go ahead, John.
I just want to say that is what's so critical about this, because this is a very emotional thing. You want to give back to the communities, the taxpayers, they want that. But when it comes down to making the decisions on budgets, when you show and present these types of items to the school board, it helps them have a vision of what they would like to do, but it also helps them understand what the budget needs to happen if they're going to do this. And it also gives them an idea of what direction they really need to have for making policy, because when you can make policy without being emotional about it, but if you don't have the facts, most likely it's just going to be what you're making from a warm-hearted feel instead of making policy decisions based on facts. And when you start seeing that you're spending an extra $400,000 on electricity and lighting and cooling because that's what's being used at night because of so many events and things like that are not school related, okay, that are from outside groups, it does change. It gives them a better understanding. Again, tells the whole story.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now let's change gears again. We're going to have another poll question coming up. Technology, IT departments that are out there, what is the number one issue that IT departments were facing over the last year? So some of them may be people bringing their own devices on campus. It might be dealing with budget. It might be dealing with, certainly cybersecurity is extremely big right now, especially over the last 2 years, even as much as a few days ago. But also, again, staff maybe getting up to speed on what systems are in place. And then what about mobile learning? So what are some of the areas that people are delving the most into when it comes to what is affecting their technology teams? So we're going to give people about another 15 seconds on that to get that in. And again, we just wanted to see, based on what we've done with surveys here, also surveys that have been done through COSIN, we definitely want to get a sense of, with the audience here, what are you running into? So we're going to give another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, wow. Yeah, this is definitely a little bit different than some of the other surveys that I've seen out there. Staff, that's definitely one of the things that we have been coming into is, you know, people trying to get their staff up to speed. We've got some others in there, so let's delve down into some of those regions. So what has been the outlook on tech management? So let's take a first look at the positives. So the first positives is that there has been an increase to move away from the paper process, the hardbound process, to digital. I know a lot of people have been using things like OneNote and Microsoft Office Online, Google Docs, or G Suite to start moving towards digital curriculum along with different curriculum sites and e-learning. But also there's been a better capability from not just the internal side, but the tools that are out there that they can handle what it is that needs to be coming in. And most people, they are pretty vigilant about cybersecurity. Even though they're concerned about it, they know that it's a very high issue and they're trying to address it. The negatives have been things like the staff. They don't have enough staff in place or enough experienced staff in place. A lot of people say that it's really not matching the full variety of needs that may be out there. We might need to bring in someone with more expertise on these areas. So definitely checking out things like COSIN with some surveys that we've seen out there that delve down into more of the details behind indices like these. But definitely more assets. I mean, this is not, again, too much of a shocker because most IT departments have a shorter life cycle that they have to replace things. It's getting a little better than it was, but, not many people are doing new in 2. They're doing new in 5, or still alive in 5, as sometimes people call them. So there's a lot more to have to deal with as far as assets. But they were saying in the survey that budget for them was the number one challenge in a lot of these surveys. So it's pretty interesting, again, to see kind of the different variations that we may see out there of who we're talking to at that point in time. Or if someone may not be working directly in technology, but maybe it's a team that is part of their operational team, that they may have a slightly different view than the IT directors that we may have surveyed through COSIN. All right. So let's get on to our final topic, because technology has a slight effect on this, which is energy. So let's talk about energy. Did your budget, what did it do this year versus last year? Did you get more budget? Did you not get more budget? Did they give you the same allocation? So let's get the polls ready for that. We'll give you another 20 seconds. Oh, yes, safety. Yeah, we'll talk about safety after that. All right, so we're going to be about another 10 seconds. And already seeing actually what I think is fairly positive. So we're going to give 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so most people are saying that their budget has increased or stayed the same. We have had a small sliver of folks that their budgets have decreased over time, but that is definitely one of the things that we've seen out there is more energy awareness in utilities as a whole. We've definitely seen a lot of positive actions over time because of the awareness that's out there. Initiatives like the President's commitment to climate control had an effect on a lot of the colleges and universities over time. A lot of them would have competitions. We've even seen internal to school districts where they would have competitions with the schools themselves, just like colleges were having with other campuses. So we've definitely seen a lot better awareness with energy over time and commitment for funding and programs and projects and commissioning and so on to really help get the budget under control. That was part of my background at a previous company, is we would actually go in and upgrade equipment, but we would also implement programs like load rolling or adjustments to the schedules, making sure equipment was optimized, periodic recommissioning. Then we do fun stuff like install fake thermostats just to give people a chance to feel like they were controlling the temperature in their area, and then we actually saw a decrease of 35% in some buildings that people just wanted a button to click, so they felt like they were cooling or heating themselves. We call them the Fisher-Price thermostats. So we would do a lot of those things behind the scenes to really help a lot with the energy and the utility budgets. So looking at some things along energy management, we've actually seen, because this is such a high-cost item and why people have focused on this, is because when you're talking about labor and pay, looking at things like vacation and sick time, that's a huge part of an operations budget. And luckily, it's gotten a little better. They definitely recognize that the savings are there. They know that this is the second biggest item on a budget. So what can we do to put money back into our programs or put towards another type of a program like preventive maintenance? That's a big, big positive that I've personally seen out there. A lot of people have looked, when they have things like energy budget stagnation, they might look at subsidies and awards for buildings that get into energy conservation, things like LEED certification they'll look at on newer buildings, looking at things like Energy Star. Utility companies are trying to lower costs and trying to stabilize energy budgets. John, what are some of the things that you guys have seen that has really helped out with energy on your side?
Well, energy is one of those things it's a moving target, so it's very, very difficult, and it's controlled through the states or PRC, the Public Regulation Commission, and pricing structures obviously are changing across the country, which definitely affects us as the consumer, and it costs us a lot more. So lots of emphasis. One of the things that we've done is we've actually created an energy center where we have an energy team where we have just employees who do nothing but energy watch, and that energy watch includes having an energy conservation officer who goes and does energy programs in the schools, creates a curriculum and works with the schools. We have another person that does nothing but watch water. He controls the water. All of our water systems are computerized throughout the district, all the athletic fields, and so we're able to monitor the water, how many gallons are going out of each nozzle, every sprinkler head, to watch that, and then we can see spikes. If there's a spike, we see that there's a problem. Try to get to it before being proactive again, before we're seeing a bill that's sky high. One of the things that's very interesting, where we anticipated this, and it's been more successful than what we've even imagined in saving. We're monitoring all the electricity use on every 15-minute use, and that has helped greatly because we can prevent any of these demand charges, which are going extremely high now, as how the regulations are being rewritten with public utilities to where they can do the demand charge much higher. But the thing is the building usage. The building usage person we have, this one lady, she is on the energy team because all requests for using a building goes through her, and she looks at it from an energy point of view. Where do we put these people? Because a lot of people are putting a request they want to use a building. They need a classroom, and so everyone thinks I'll just use the library. We have put the plans on the school dude database to where she can just pull up the floor plan of the school, what they request. She can look at the floor plan and identify a room which can be isolated. Instead of turning on the entire school building to heat or cool one classroom, we can put it on she can identify a classroom that has its own system, and she can isolate it and say, okay, you can be using this classroom, and she gives them permission to use that classroom, and we'll turn on the lights and turn on the electricity, the cooling or whatever. And so what's happened is it's become a much more economical and energy-saving process because we identify where they can go or where they don't go, and you would be surprised how, from a security point of view, it keeps them out of the rest of the buildings. But that has been a huge factor that we did not think was going to be that big. We thought it would save, and it just made sense to try it, but it has been the results, the data speaks for itself. We're saving hundreds of thousands of BTU and kilowatt hours by being able to do scheduling properly, the use of the building, and not having the rest of the building on just because one classroom is being used. So that's one aspect that we've looked at.
Yeah, that's a huge aspect because I've actually seen where people have done that to say before you even go into the calendar, they print off a floor plan for putting at the front desk of the building, and they'll say this area highlighted on the floor plan is where you can schedule the facility use. Otherwise, we've got to fire up, a whole other bevy of systems to get it done. Some people go to the big extreme to say you can only use portable units or this small section of area. But I have seen where people have said, before you even go into calendar system, these are the rooms that we will turn on and make sure we've got set up for you. Otherwise, you're not going to be in this part of the building. So it was kind of a low-cost, preventive type of just a simple map, simple little piece of paper to pin up on the board or put behind the desk that somebody could look at it. But certainly we saw a slight decrease in cost, basically about $200 million, out of a $1.3 billion that was a couple of years ago to $1.07 billion is what we saw in decrease in cost, but the usage was pretty steady over time. But the segue on the floor plan, you mentioned things like we did that for facility use, we did it for energy. We also want to talk about safety because that is a factor to keep people out of those sections. So that's a good segue into safety and security. what are some of the biggest challenges that people are running across with safety and security? So when we're talking about keeping everyone in the loop, that could be internal, could be external. How do we let people know what our protocols are? How do we coordinate with protocols? It could be coordinating with first responders, for example. What are people doing from routine drill standpoints? Or, some people may even do desktop exercises. What about the plans that people have out there? How are you making sure that the plans are in people's hands? So what are some of the things that you're running into from a challenge standpoint with safety and security? So we're going to give about another 5 seconds on that, and I'm going to skip to the results while that's looking up. Enforcing access protocols. So that's a good, tie into what we were just talking about. That's the number one thing out there, along with coordination and keeping everyone in the loop. Again, that's where I'll usually see, I always tell people there's 3 core problems. I used to say 2, now there's 3 core problems I've seen out there that you can pretty much boil any problem down to. It is resistance to change, a lack of communication, and anytime the word should comes up, well, they should know how to do this, they should know to do that, people should know better. Those 3 problems are always out there. Keeping everyone in the loop, that's a big one out there. And enforcing the access protocols, people should not go into this area. They should know not to come in. So this just reinforces what I was discussing out there. So let's talk a little bit more about security and what the outlook is. So 2% of people are less concerned about safety. That means 98% of people are very concerned about safety. So don't let that number fool you. But the problem is that the majority of people say that their budgets have stayed the same for security, and those concerns are impacting the budget. So that's a tough thing to look at, is what we have more of awareness, we have more concern, but our budgets are not changing over time. So we have to really look at where we're going to put those things in at and how we're going to put them in at. Security, we definitely saw increases in the use of security cameras. That's definitely been an increase over time, trying to have better entryway protocols. Even we've eaten our own dog food on that, where you walk into our building, you have to have a sticker, you have to register in, you have to register out. We even have name tags on ourselves with who we are, so we are definitely eating the same dog food a lot of other people are eating out there. We have our plans electronically, so in case there is an issue, we can pull up our cell phone and pull up what the protocols are, where do we meet at, where we know where the Knox boxes are, or certain people know where the Knox boxes are to be able to get into the facilities and where the first responders are going to come in at. So coordination and communication, and not assuming people should know what to do, when to do, and how to do it. You start tackling those, it's a lot easier to deal with. So in our final summary, this is where we were looking at on the industry. So most people were saying things were positive in community use and energy, which luckily they're related. They really didn't see a huge betterment or a huge detriment when it came to preventive maintenance or technology or safety. But deferred maintenance, that's not changing over time. It's really, if anything, it's getting worse with how do we tackle this backlog of what's out there, how do we address it, and how do we budget for it. So closing out in the next section, talking about the staffing and the survey and the budget operations, a lot of the highlights we ran into out there is we wanted to have a benchmark in operational excellence. We've seen that there's people that are asking for this. They're looking for things like staffing and budgeting in one place. And we wanted to give you a chance to see who all participated in the survey. So the bulk was public K-12, but we also had independent schools and higher ed in this, and what departments they recognize. Because there's some numbers in here I know people are going to look at, like how much of your work is outsourced. So usually when you're talking about higher ed, the predominant sense is a lot of our personnel are in-house, whereas a public K-12 or independent K-12 might be a little bit less. They might be outsourcing things like custodial, for example. And that's one of the big topics I'll hear people ask is, how much custodial staff should I have, or how many mechanics, electricians, plumbers, engineers, skilled personnel should I have? So we broke it down 2 ways. The first one is per student. So you're looking at per every 1,000 students, you have 2 maintenance employees, 1 ground employee, 7 custodial employees. And then square footage-wise, this is the typical area we'll see at. And I know John is going to jump in on this, so I'm going to cue him up for it. The answer that I always gave when somebody said, how many employees should I have per square foot? My answer was, well, how clean do you want the building to be and how functional do you want it to be? If I told you 28,000 square feet, how does that relate to it? The other thing you have to think about is the age of the facility and how different it is versus other facilities. How you clean the new building and what you clean it with is going to be completely different in most cases than a building that's 40 years old. So that's one thing that people have to really think about is that's a great generic high-level number, and you have to think about things like APA's level of service. Are you a 1 or are you a 5? Most colleges and districts and independent schools are going to be about mid-level, about a 3. A hotel, you expect to be top of the line. You're going to have more staff to clean and maintain it, versus, say, the other end of the spectrum where you've got dust bunnies and whatnot floating through the building. Most people say we're about in the middle. It's clean, it's safe, it's functional. It may not be pretty, it may be a little dull, but it works perfectly fine. So you have to think about level of service when you're talking about staff, and you also have to think about what your perception of clean, safe, and functional is versus cosmetically that other people may look at it. So, John, I'll let you jump in on things you might be thinking about with staff per student or square foot or for these different trades.
Absolutely. And you hit it. It's a matter of what is your feeling of what is the level of service that you want to have out there to your customer, who the stakeholders are, the students, the teachers, also the parents. But the idea too is also serving what it is, what is your client's need of that facility. If you're taking care of, if it's a special ed facility, where we have a number of facilities that are just dedicated for special ed facilities, whether it's autism center or something like that, and kids that are D-level issues with special ed, any of those type of things, you're going to have a much higher level of need and service when you're doing those types of assessments, obviously. The other thing is that you need to look at what it is they're taking care of. You may have custodians that the square footage doesn't work as well because they are cleaning lots of restrooms. And so one of the things that we do with a lot of that is we pin it down by seconds. We'll time it where someone can vacuum a room in 5 minutes, or they clean a fixture, a sink. It takes them 90 seconds to clean a sink, and we figure out how many sinks they have. So you could have a custodian cleaning. The average around the country is anywhere between 25,000 and 26,000 square feet, but you may have someone doing 18,000. But they may be doing lots of restrooms also. And then again, what's the level of cleanliness you need? The other thing that you have to look at carefully is on the square footage of how many maintenance workers you have. Again, if you have your data and you can look at your data, you're going to see, do you need to have a maintenance worker isn't a maintenance worker. They're all specialties. They're either an HVAC person, or they're a plumber, or they're an electrician. They're specialized crafts. So do you need painters, or do you need electricians, or do you need HVAC technicians, or do you need a carpenter? Do you need someone that does graphics? There's so many different things. So you have to have your data of where are your departments, where are the needs of your departments. Pull in up those reports, the status of those reports, the status of work orders. What's your backlog of work orders? Where's the need? Once you identify where some of those needs are, then you got to look at, because of budget constraints, is it cheaper to outsource some things? Some things you're going to find are cheaper to outsource than you can do in-house, and you have some better controls. Or there's some things that are going to be done better in-house and not outsourced. And you need to have a pulse, not just of your staff, but the pulse of the community resources that are out there, the contractors that are out there, contractors that will work with you, and what those costs are. So you have to have the budget and staffing data is so important, because you can't just say I need more money. That doesn't do the trick anymore. You can't just throw money at it. You have to be very precise what it is you're doing, how you're doing it, where the resources are going, and what are the standards of work are your expectations, And then you got to look at what are the expectations of the board, of the school board, of the stakeholders, of the parents, the staff out there. That you may have one level, they have a different level, and that's where a lot of communication and sitting down, and again, taking the data, sharing it with them, sharing the data that you have with stakeholders and with school board, and saying, what is it there? Where do we want to go? What is acceptable to you? It's amazing when you have that story, when you have the data, how they will listen, and then they will understand better. They understand what's going on. It's extremely complicated systems in facilities of schools, as you all know. That's the thing. You have to have a story. You have to have the data to work that, because it cannot be any more off the seat of your pants.
No, exactly. And speaking of surveys, the next one we're going to be coming out with, we're going to launch the next series of surveys in November to prep for the next year for 2018. So again, trying to have these numbers to help people tell their story, to help back them up. But like I say, you also have to look at things internally, through a lot of the reports, and then understanding the data that's out there. In addition to this report and these recordings,